Did you know that enslaved people were forbidden from learning to read and write? And it was mostly because slave owners feared that literate slaves could access anti-slavery ideas or forge free passes, or maybe even escape. But despite these dangers, some slaves, like Frederick Douglass, secretly learned to read and write. Now, thanks to their bravery, we have 5 of the most heartbreaking letters written by slaves. From lovers like the Newbys to freedom fighter Frederick Douglass, these letters reveal the human desire for freedom and justice. They showcase the strength, the love, and the resilience of people who, despite unimaginable hardships, found ways to express their deepest emotions and aspirations. So today I invite you to explore these letters that not only expose the evils of slavery, but also offer a glimpse into the lives of those who defied the odds to express themselves. Number 5. On August 16, 1859, Harriet put into words a desperate plea to her husband, Dangerfield Newby. The letter reads, "Dear husband, it is said master is in want of money. If so, I know not what time he may sell me, and then all my bright hopes of the future are blasted. For there has been one bright hope to cheer me in all my troubles, and that is to be with you. For if I thought I should never see you, this earth would have no charms for me." Despite addressing her letter as dear husband, Dangerfield Newby and Harriet weren't legally married. It wasn't because they didn't want to, but because Harriet, being a slave, had no legal say over her own life. Unlike Harriet, Dangerfield grew up free in Ohio and worked as a blacksmith. He met Harriet, fell in love, and together they had 7 children. Then tragedy struck. Harriet's master decided to sell her and their children to the harsh cotton plantations in Louisiana for some quick cash. To him, Harriet and her children were just property to be sold. Despite being a family with love and bonds just like any other family, Harriet, desperate not to be separated from the father of her children, her one bright hope, continued the letter. "Do all you can for me, which I have no doubt you will. I want to see you so much. I want you to buy me as soon as possible. For if you do not get me, somebody else will. There has been one bright hope to cheer me in all my troubles, and that is to be with you, your affectionate wife." Imagine the fear and the pain Harriet must have felt, knowing she might never see her children or the man she loved again. The courage it took to write that letter, hoping against hope that Dangerfield could somehow save them. Dangerfield gathered all of his earnings as a blacksmith, $742, which is about $20,000 today, in response to the mother of his children's frantic plea. But Harriet's master demanded $1,000 more, an amount Dangerfield simply couldn't raise. Imagine the mental torture this loving father and mother endured, knowing freedom was so close, but yet still out of reach. Desperate to keep his family together, Dangerfield joined abolitionist Captain John Brown, hoping to free his family by fighting against slavery. Tragically, in October 1859, a sniper shot and killed him while he was on watch. The townspeople mutilated his body, taking as souvenirs things that we cannot describe on YouTube, then left his remains out in the open for over a day before burying him. Though Dangerfield and Harriet never saw each other again, Harriet's letter continues to serve as a monument to love and sacrifice in the face of the atrocities of slavery. Number 4. To my old master. When Jordan Anderson's previous owner, Patrick Henry Anderson, asked Jordan to come back and live with him again, he had some pretty serious terms and wasn't scared to pass them along. This letter, although amazing, is quite touching. The words bear the pain that Jordan's family suffered while he was enslaved. It was written on the 7th of August, 1865. To my old master, Colonel P.H. Anderson, Big Spring, Tennessee. Sir, I got your letter, and I was glad to find that you had not forgotten Jordan, and that you wanted me to come back and live with you again, promising to do better for me than anybody else can. I have often felt uneasy about you. I thought the Yankees would have hung you long before this for harboring rebs they found at your house. I suppose they never heard about your going to Colonel Martin's to kill the Union soldier that was left by his company in their stable. Although you shot at me twice before I left you, I did not want to hear of you being hurt, and am glad you're still living. It would do me good to go back to the dear old home again and see Miss Mary and Miss Martha and Alan, Esther, Green, and Lee. Give my love to them all and tell them I hope we will meet in the better world, if not in this. I would have gone back to see you all when I was working in the Nashville hospital, but one of the neighbors told me that Henry intended to shoot me if he ever got a chance. If someone tried to shoot you twice, would you ever think of seeing them again? This goes to show that despite the threat of death on his life and the torture his master must have put him through, Jordan still cared and didn't want to see his master hurt. His mention of specific individuals shows that he still holds some affection and connection to the people from his past. This highlights the human capacity to form bonds and attachments even in oppressive circumstances. Stockholm Syndrome, maybe? I want to know particularly what the good chance is your purpose to give me. I am doing tolerably well here. I get $25 a month with victuals and clothing, have a comfortable home for Mandy, the folks call her Mrs. Anderson, and the children, Millie, Jane, and Grundy, go to school and are learning well. The teacher says Grundy has a head for a preacher. They go to Sunday school, and Mandy and me attend church regularly. We are kindly treated. Sometimes we overhear others saying, them colored people were slaves down in Tennessee. The children feel hurt when they hear such remarks, but I tell them it was no disgrace in Tennessee to belong to Colonel Anderson. Many darkies would have been proud, as I used to be, to call you master. Now, if you will, write and say what wages you will give me. I will be better able to decide whether it would be to my advantage to move back again. Jordan talks about how good his life is for him right now, and regardless of how much he cared for his old master, he was still careful and didn't want to be roped into being a subservient individual again. In his letter, he continued, "As to my freedom, which you say I can have, there's nothing to be gained on that score, as I got my free papers in 1864 from the Provost Marshal General of the Department of Nashville. Mandy says she would be afraid to go back without some proof that you were disposed to treat us justly and kindly. And we have concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send us our wages for the time we served you. This will make us forget and forgive old scores and rely on your justice and friendship in the future. I served you faithfully for 32 years and Mandy 20 years. At $25 a month for me and $2 a week for Mandy, our earnings would amount to $11,680. Add to this the interest for the time our wages have been kept back, and deduct what you paid for our clothing, and 3 doctor's visits to me, and pulling a teeth for Mandy, and the balance will show what we are in justice entitled to. Please send the money by Adams Express in care of V. Winters, Esquire." If you ask me, asking for all that money is the right move. If the master is not ready to pay back like Jordan is asking, what's the guarantee that he won't be shot at again or forced back into a life of servitude? The letter continues, "If you fail to pay us for faithful labors in the past, we can have little faith in your promises in the future. We trust the good master has opened your eyes to the wrongs which you and your fathers have done to me and my fathers, in making us toil for you for generations without recompense. Here, I draw my wages every Saturday night, but in Tennessee, there was never any payday for the Negroes any more than for the horses and cows. Surely there will be a day of reckoning for those who defraud the laborer of his hire." One can feel the subtle irony and sarcasm in Jordan's words here. In answering this letter, please state if there would be any safety for my Millie and Jane, who are now grown up and both good-looking girls. You know how it was with poor Matilda and Catherine. I would rather stay here and starve and die, if it come to that, than have my girls brought to shame by the violence and the wickedness of their young masters. You will also please state if there has been any schools open for the colored children in your neighborhood. The great desire of my life now is to give my children an education and have them form virtuous habits. Say howdy to George Carter and thank him for taking the pistol from you when you were shooting at me. This is just nuts, but if you ask me, this is the best comeback ever and a way to ensure that his rights are never downtrodden again. Number 3. Honored Sir, Slavery was absolutely brutal. African Americans had to deal with the selfish and greedy motives of slavers. And the same goes for this formerly enslaved woman. In a letter to the relative of her former master on October 26, 1809, she wrote, "Honored Sir, I was a few years back a slave on your property of Houston Tower, and was fancied by Mr. Tomuning, unto whom Mr. Thomas James sold me. On his leaving the estate, he took me with him to Trelawney, where he died, and left me very well situated. But Mr. T. James persuaded me to return to Houston Tower, as every relation I have in the world are there. So, sir, by his persuasions I returned, and he appointed a place for me to build my house. Accordingly, I built a house, but finding it too small to contain me and two black-brown sisters I have on the estate, I built another for myself in particular, and was in all respects very comfortable until Mr. James' death." You see, Mary Williamson had been gifted lands after someone who fancied her, bought her, and freed her. According to her letter, she was doing quite well for herself with 2 houses to her name, but when the man with whom she had an understanding with died, everything changed. Her letter continues. "Then Mr. Cacaldi, the overseer, turned very severe on the Negroes on the property, and they could find no redress. For one complaint to Mr. Brown, the attorney, he punished them the more severely, that the poor creatures are harassed out of their lives, many dying. On Mr. John H. James coming to the island, he took a look at the estate, but did not have the Negroes called up in the latter end of August. The Negroes went on a Sunday to Mr. James at Green Island, seeking for redress from their so severe usage, for which reason, these people were just asking to be treated right. And for every complaint, they were severely punished. The punishment didn't stop with them. It extended to Mary, who has been keeping them alive by sheltering and feeding them. Mary described how her livelihood was taken from her in the letter, saying, Mr. Brown and Mr. Cacaldi took it into their hands that I had persuaded the Negroes to apply to Mr. James, and early in the morning came and pulled down both my houses and took away the timbers. Now, honored sir, as I was sold of the property free, I might have been discouraged as having no property or right, what has my 2 sisters and their young children no right to a house on their master's estate. Their children are young and left without a shelter. I was a great help to them, having a ground and garden with provisions which might have been given to them. But it pleased your attorney and overseer to destroy everything, plowing up the garden and turning the stocks into the ground or provisions, so that I am not only a sufferer, but your poor Negroes are deprived of the means of subsistence. Honored sir, this is the truth and nothing but the truth. Your Negroes are harassed, flogged, and drove past human strength without any redress. To complain to an uncle against his nephew is needless. It's not my own immediate case that make me address this to you, but my suffering family, who cannot go otherwise as I am obliged to do. This letter exposes the brutal reality of slavery. It highlights the authority of plantation managers who could suddenly become very severe. These managers had near total control over the lives of both enslaved and freed people. As soon as the man who freed her died, the overseer decided it was his turn to take over Mary's life, turn it upside down, and make her and her family suffer for no reason in particular. The letter continues. Thus, sir, I have laid down the state of estate of Houston Tower, which, if not soon addressed, you will have no slaves to work on the estate. I must beg my honored master for to give me a little spot somewhere on the estate, for I do not wish to go from my family, as they want every assistance I can give them. I feel for you, sir, as if I was still your slave, and, as Mr. Cacaldi says, he will make your people sup sorrow by spoonfuls. They really do, for he satisfy his words. With all respect, I am honored, master, your most obedient, humble servant, Mary Williamson. Yeah, as sad as it is, this letter leaves many questions unanswered. And the most heartbreaking aspect is the fact that there are no records of a reply to Mary's letter. No one knows what happened to Mary Williamson and her family, and if she ever got the help she requested. Number 2, letter to the president. This next letter is evidence that even though enslaved people were denied citizenship and unable to participate in political activities, they were aware of the political world around them and found ways to participate in it. Shortly after James K. Polk won the 1844 presidential election, a slave named Harry wrote him a letter. Suffer your faithful servant Harry to say a few words to you by letter, written by one of your best friends in this country, to inform you that I am doing the best I can. I have been so overjoyed at the news of your elevation that I have hardly known what I was, and some of the Whigs call me president to plague me and to ridicule you. But this I know, that I have hardly ate, drank, slept, or worked any since I heard the glorious news. Harry was Polk's property, but Polk's father had originally owned him before leaving him to Polk's brother, Samuel. When Samuel died in 1839, the ownership of Harry was transferred to James. Harry was a blacksmith, which made him a very valuable slave. James made money from Harry by hiring him out on an annual basis, and he was earning as much as $400. Harry was allowed to keep a portion of the money for himself, but most of the money went to James, and this put him in the ranks of important slaves. And as a faithful slave, he did everything he could for a master that literally only cared about how much money he could fetch. The letter continues. You may be assured, my dear Master Jimmy, that I have done all in my power for you, though an humble Negro. I made some votes, for I have been betting and losing on you for the last several years, but I have made it all up now. I must tell you what I have won on your election, and I have got near all in hand cash, $25 and 11 par boots, 40 gallons of whiskey, 1 barrel flour, and lots of tobacco. But you must not think that I will drink the whiskey myself. No, sir, for I have treated it all out in electioneering for you through my friends who stood by me in electioneering trouble. I tell you, Master Jimmy, that I made some big speeches for you, and though an humble Negro, I made some votes for you. I am in hopes that you will come to this state before you go to the White House, and let me see you once more before I die, for I am in fear that I will never enjoy that pleasure. Can you imagine? He did all of that for someone whose family has been handing him down like a property, but it doesn't even end there. If you do come down to your plantation and don't come to Carrollton, please write to me or to Mr. Kimbrough, the man that has hired me, and I will come up and see you. I'm getting old and my eyesight getting so bad, and I am so badly afflicted with the rheumatitis pain that I can't do as well as I would like to do, and do not know whose hands I may fall into the next year. As Mr. Kimbrough says that he can't hire me anymore if he has to give near the price that he has had to give heretofore. I would like to live with him if the price is so as to justify him in hiring me, but let that be as it may, my dear master, I expect to serve you faithful as long as I live, let my condition be what it may. I have nothing more but remain your faithful and loving servant during life. Give my best love to my old miss. When you write, please let me know how she is. Also, Mr. Walker's family. I have 12 children, all living. Give my love to all the rest of my friends and relations. Now, apart from showing how much effort he put in to help James Polk in his race for presidency, Harry was making a plea to his master to allow him to stay with his current employer, Mr. Kimbrough. Times are hard. His eyesight is failing, and Mr. Kimbrough is complaining about how much it costs to hire him. And Harry was anxious that if he had to be transferred to work elsewhere, he may not fall into nice hands. James Polk died in 1949, and at that time, Harry had been recalled to Polk's Yolobusha County plantation. 11 years later, Polk's widow sold Harry, along with half of the Polk estate. There are no records showing that Harry lived to see emancipation or what happened to his family, which he boasted of in his letter. Number 1, no slaveholders here. This next letter was written by an escaped slave who became a social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. In the 19th century, he became the most important leader of the movement for African American civil rights. After escaping from slavery in Maryland in 1838, Frederick Douglass emerged as the national leader of the movement for African American civil rights in the 19th century, gaining fame for his powerful speeches and incisive anti-slavery writings. Douglass was a living counterexample to the pro-slavery argument that enslaved people lacked the intellectual capacity to be independent citizens. Northerners were often shocked that such a remarkable orator had once been enslaved. Despite not knowing his age, because his birth was not documented, Douglass secretly taught himself to read and write because he saw literacy as a key to freedom. In one of his many letters after his escape, he wrote about his children. He said, "Dear fellows, they are all in comfortable beds and are sound asleep, perfectly secure under my own roof. There are no slaveholders here to rend my heart by snatching them from my arms, or blast a mother's dearest hopes by tearing them from her bosom. These dear children are ours, not to work up into rice, sugar, and tobacco, but to watch over, regard, and protect, and to rear them up in the nurture and the admonition of the gospel, to train them up in the paths of wisdom and virtue, and, as far as we can, to make them useful to the world and to themselves." This part of Douglass's letter reveals how deeply it mattered to him that his children wouldn't be raised in slavery. Born into bondage, Douglass transformed his life, becoming the most famous African American in the 19th century. He used his literacy and voice to help change a nation from its roots in slavery to one torn by the Civil War and, ultimately, to a country seeking reconciliation and a brighter future. For Douglass, knowing his children were safe and free meant everything. It wasn't just about physical safety, it was about the hope and promise of a life where they could grow, learn, and thrive. His journey from slavery to freedom and his fight for civil rights were all about ensuring a better world for the next generation. His words remind us of the profound relief and joy that come with knowing your loved ones are safe and free from the horrors of the past.